Howdy, good afternoon, g'day mate. How you going there, son? And listen, how about us old Aussies, we teach you poor young Americans that are trying to learn about the Australian English language. Well, listen, this poor guy here, JPS, you got it wrong, mate. It was not the English that first settled in Australia back in 1777, 1778. It wasn't. It was way back in 1400. Yes, the Dutch. Yes, the Dutch people had New Holland, and they were up there across the top of the Philippines. And they come over there to Darwin, and then they travelled inland to inland Australia, where they had a Dutch colony for 150 years. And then for 150 years later, a English captain who come down from Darwin trying to find his way down to Adelaide ran into these Dutch people. And of course he could speak Dutch. And he said, "Oh, how come you're here?" And they said, "We've been here for 150 years." And they were just south of Darwin by about 300, 400 miles. So there you go. And the local Aborigines learned to say the word "ya" instead of saying "yes." So therefore then, the English weren't here first. So that's a very big misconception. And another one is, that's why we have a farm machinery product over here called New Holland. Yes, we have New Holland tractors, and that's what we have, because New Holland is Dutch. Isn't that where Holland is? Deutschland. That's right. So the Dutch were here 300 years before the English, but the Dutch didn't bother colonising it because they were up there in the Dutch islands above Australia, which is now known as what? You go have a look. Malaysia, up that way, Indonesia. That's right. That's where the Dutch settled. Then they come wandering on down. Also, at another period of time, a Dutch ship was shipwrecked against the Australian coast, several hundred miles north of Perth, and then it then was wrecked, and the survivors went on to the west coast of Australia, north of Perth by several hundred miles. So one of the lifeboats off the sailing ship, several people then sailed for several weeks heading north, back up there to the Dutch islands, and they were saved. When they sent down a rescue ship to save the other 48 people or 98 people down on the west coast of Australia above Perth, they found out there was no trace of them. They'd all disappeared. They thought they had been eaten up by Aborigines, but they weren't. They just simply passed away because they're too scared to talk to the local Aborigines, and therefore then they starved to death, and the Aborigines would have went out and buried them. So therefore then, that's why they didn't survive. The Aborigines are very friendly people. They're not like Africans, and they're not like American Negroes, which are originally there from Africa. The Australian Aborigines originally walked here through, get this, up there through Malaysia, which was originally joined on over to India and over to Africa, and also through there to Europe many years ago, millions of years ago. Yes, and Tasmania was connected to the bottom end of Australia. Also, the top end of Australia was connected to Papua New Guinea. That's why there's a whole bunch of islands up the top end of Australia. Yes. Go have a look at your history. Anyway, that's it there for me, Mr. Hominoid. Mate, if you want to come on a live stream or anybody wants to know anything, have a live stream there with me, Mr. Hominoid. I'll be quite happy to teach this poor American guy here who's watching this show here about learning about Australia. So let's have a look. That's what he's watching. Why the Aussies accent is so hard to understand.
Unless you're scripted, you're useless. Unless you're scripted, you're useless.
Sorry, Mr. Keating. Anyway, this constant change has evolved the accent into what we know today.
Right. Well, the very simple way to explain the Australian accent, that was the former Prime Minister Paul Keating, who was the Prime Minister after Bob Hawke, who then later come John Howard, who then abolished the gun laws in Australia and made it illegal to own a firearm if you had a criminal record or whatever other reason, because of the great tragedy down there in Tasmania, which was, have a guess, yes, a former prison colony. Yes, down in Van Diemen's Land. Van Diemen meaning Devil's Island, which is where all the bad convicts from England went to. And then once the British realised that they stuffed up, and they sent all the convicts out there from England 200 years ago, and now we had the highest amount of gold, we had the highest amount of iron ore exports, silver, copper, brass, coal, sugar, and all the other food products. Britain has now realised they gave us, the convicts, 200 years ago, a gold chest of gold. Thank you very much. England, again, you stuck your foot in it, because that's what the British do. The same as when the British took over India, and then they conquered India, and then eventually the Indian people of India kicked them out. And now when you go to England, there's so many Indians in England that they even try to change the street names to an Indian-sounding name. But due to the British legislation, they're not allowed to change the name of the streets to Bandish, Bagdush, or any other name. They're just going to leave it as it is, like Whitechapel Road. That's a joke. Remember the Beatles? Anyway, so if you want to know something about Australia there, JPS, ask me, Mr. Hominoid, and I'll quite happily sit there and do a live stream with you, or any other American who wants to learn about Australia. We have different accents. I am at the moment talking in square tongue, Sydney, East Coast, white man, city language. Now, if I was out in the country, I'll be saying things like, "G'day, mate, what time are you coming out there for have a smoke, eh? What time are you going to put the billy on?" Okay, all right. Okay, leave the gunja alone, and make sure you bring in the heifers and do the roundup and Billy Bob and a few other words like that, and like a bilby. And I'll meet you over there at the Moonaba, and I'll see you out there by Goonabaraban. And therefore then you don't be a Wagga Wagga, and if you're a Wagga Wagga, you don't bring all the other Wagga Waggas with you, because you wouldn't have a clue what a Wagga Wagga is. And a Wagga Wagga is the name of a town. And Wagga means crow. Yes, C-R-O-W, crow. Wagga, W-A-G-G-A, means crow. Wagga Wagga means land of many crows. There you go. If I said to you, I'll meet you at Murwillumbah in English, Australian, you would go to the town of Murwillumbah. If I said to you, oh, Murwillumbah, you would say, oh, that's Aboriginal, because I said it faster. It means I will meet you and come down and sit by my campfire in any town, anywhere at all. So if somebody walks up to you and they are full black Aboriginal and they say, Murwillumbah, that means come sit by my campfire. That means I am friendly, I want to give you a meal. And then if they also turn around and say, oh, Murwillumbah, Murwillumbah, twice, that means land of many possums. Yes, possum, like raccoon, possum. That's what the word Murwillumbah means when you say twice in the Aboriginal indigenous language, just so you catch on. So, Murwillumbah means come sit by my campfire. Murwillumbah means there is a lot of possums in the local area. Or there is the township of Murwillumbah. Murwillumbah. I'll spell it again. Murwillumbah. Murwillumbah. It's up there on the Tweed River. Yes, and it goes highly under floodwater, and it's only 25 kilometres from the coast. And there is a weir that stops the salt water going upstream to a town called Nimbin. And Nimbin means rolling hills and green pastures, which is where the dairy farm cows used to be. And now Nimbin is the home of the local marijuana festivities in the state of New South Wales. Now I'll lead you on again. New South Wales' original name was New Southern Wales. Yes, like the state, like the country, Wales in Britain. So it was called New Southern Wales. Victoria is named after Queen Victoria. Queensland is named after the Queen's Land, which is Queen Victoria. South Australia is called South Australia because it is the southern part of Australia, and Northern Territory was separated from the original South Australia, which was originally called Central Australia, because it's in between Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria, and Western Australia. That's where there's two vertical parallel lines down the middle of Australia. So therefore then they split it, and they called the northern top Northern Territory because it did not have enough population to make up a state. So therefore then it was called the Northern Territory until it gets to a higher population. And down in Adelaide, which is named after Queen Adelaide and is also known as the City of the Churches. Tasmania is named after Abel Tasman. Abel Tasman as the Tasman Strait or Bass Strait or the Tasman Sea. Therefore then the name of Hobart was the name of a captain called Hobart. There you go. Western Australia has the largest landmass for one state in Australia, but it also has the most smaller population because basically it's all desert, and the northern part of Western Australia is Aboriginal ground known as the Kimberley Ranges or the Flinders Ranges, which is also where they have a famous plant by the name of dog's nuts. Yes, a plant is called dog nuts. So if your dog has a pair of nuts, well, there's actually a bush that you can eat, and it is called dog's nuts. So go Google it if you don't believe me. Anyway, then we have towns like Exmouth, which is American US Air Force Base on the west coast of Western Australia. Exmouth, there's a Gladstone, and there's all sorts of places up there. And they're beautiful. There's even a place where you can actually get in the ocean and play with the local dolphins. So if you would like to know anything else with Mr. Hominoid about Australia, please join me. Anyway, if you'd like to have a live stream chat, I'll tell you all about Australia. Now here's one for you. What is a numbat and what is a bilby? So are you a bilby or are you a numbat? So bilby is B-I-L-B-Y and a numbat is N-U-M-B-A-T. And also, on that story this guy is now watching on television, the guy can't even say the name of the town right. He calls it Kununurra. It's not. It's Cunnamulla. So he can't even say the name of the town right. These people from overseas that try to pronounce the Australian names. It's called Cunnamulla. Cunnamulla is in northern Western Australia. Right? Cunnamulla. Right? Anyway, so we won't go into oodnadadas about it because no point getting a gerildery over your battle about your Gundagai up there at Demerik, and we'll work it all out later. And they're just a couple of strange names of Australian country towns. Like we also have a town called Canowindra, which is also pronounced as Canoundra. So if you write down the word Canowindra and you spell it also, pronounce it as Canoundra. And recently it has been under floodwater. There you go. And Gundagai is where the dog sat on the tucker box in World War II. And that's another story. So for me, Mr. Hominoid, give me a yell. See you later. Remember, keep a smile on your face, be happy. If you feel suicidal, call Lifeline or any other emergency service or charities that help you with mental depression. But if you just want to be happy, listen to Mr. Hominoid. Go down and check out my channel. Almost 2,000 videos. Some crazy, silly, also out in the Australian countryside. Also travelling around mysteries, missing people, and places of strange things and strange people. Like this man here, who's over there in America.
As Australian English. So why is it so hard for others to get right?
I think it's because of that familiarity. So your brain will always, is always looking for patterns. It's always looking.
Oh, I love these people that try. She's down there in Victoria. She's one of these speech therapists, you know, that tells you all about the different accents in Australia. The problem is she hasn't even been anywhere else around Australia. All she's ever done is sat inside a university. Oh, my God. I was an ambassador for 2000 Olympic Games, and I've also travelled between Queensland and Victoria and all over Australia. So if you want to speak in Aboriginal language, I can say to you, you're going to have a good Joanna. Right? So, good Joanna, which means a good night, and I'll see you later. So, don't be a bana, which means a bad boy. So, you keep your bana in your pocket, and you be a good boy. All right? So, no bana, and I'll see you later from Mr. Hominoid. And by the way, there's over 200 different Aboriginal languages in Australia.